Scientists compared Irish DNA with DNA from every nation in Europe. They expected to find the usual answers. Celtic DNA from Central Europe, Viking blood from Scandinavia, and Roman traces from the south. But what they found made them stop. Across the whole continent, across dozens of countries and thousands of DNA samples, only one region matched the Irish in a way that no textbook had predicted. It was not England, Wales, or even Scotland, which is just across the water. The match came from a mountainous area in northern Spain. This area is home to a people who speak a language unrelated to every other language on Earth. The people are the Basques. The deeper the scientists looked, the stranger and more amazing the story became. Ancient skeletons, Ice Age migrations, and a genetic mark that survived thousands of years of invasion and disease, all pointed to the same answer. Ireland and the Basque country are connected by an ancient shared ancestry that most people have never heard about. This is what the DNA really showed. If you find this helpful, subscribe now. The link is in the description. Now let's look at what the data showed. The research began at Trinity College, Dublin, in the Smurfit Institute of Genetics under Professor Dan Bradley. Bradley and his team set out to do something that had never been done on such a large scale. They wanted to create a complete genetic map of Ireland and compare it with population databases from across Europe. They collected samples from hundreds of Irish people. They compared those samples with genetic records from Britain and mainland Europe. Then they tested thousands of genetic markers at the same time. The results were clear. Ireland's closest genetic relatives were found in Galicia and the Basque country of northern Spain. Not in Britain, and not in the main Celtic regions of Europe, but in Iberia. This was not a weak or unclear signal. The research was published in the science journal Nature. It showed that an ancient genetic marker, known as haplogroup 1, was found in 98.3% of the people tested in Connacht, the westernmost province of Ireland. This was the highest level of the marker found anywhere in the world. Across the rest of Europe, these same ancient markers had been weakened by thousands of years of migration, invasion, and population replacement. In France, the number was 50%. In northern Italy, it was about 33%. In Turkey, it was less than 2%. Only in the Basque country did the number rise again, reaching 89%. Two populations at opposite ends of Europe, separated by the sea and mountain ranges, had somehow kept the same ancient genetic fingerprint better than anyone else on the continent. The question raised by the data was simple. How? The answer required going back not just hundreds of years, but tens of thousands of years. To understand why the Irish and Basques share this remarkable genetic link, we have to return to a time when most of Europe could not support human life. About 25,000 years ago, during a period known as the Last Glacial Maximum, huge sheets of ice covered Europe. The ice stretched from Scandinavia through Britain and deep into Central Europe. The people living in northern and central Europe had nowhere to go. They moved south and crowded into a few warmer areas along the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. The Basque territory in the Franco-Cantabrian region, covering what is now northern Spain and southwestern France, was one of the largest and most heavily populated of these Ice Age refuges. Hunter-gatherer groups crowded into the narrow coastal area and waited out the cold for thousands of years. The Basque people are considered the closest living descendants of this Paleolithic refuge population. Their ancestry reaches back to the Last Glacial Maximum, about 20,000 years ago. When the ice finally moved back about 15,000 years ago, these populations spread outward and returned to the empty parts of Europe. The Franco-Cantabrian coast played an important role as both a safe refuge and a starting point for the resettlement of Europe. Some groups moved north and east across the continent. Others appear to have traveled by sea along the Atlantic coast, moving from island to island toward the northwest. Ice Age survivors who had remained in northwestern Spain as the climate became warmer eventually found their way to Ireland. Ireland, sitting at the far western edge of Europe, became their destination. Once they arrived, geography did the rest. The Atlantic Ocean surrounded the island like a wall. It protected the people of Ireland from the population changes that swept through the rest of Europe for thousands of years. The genetic connection between Ireland and the Basques is especially clear in one marker carried on the male Y chromosome. Haplogroup R1b is the most common Y chromosome haplogroup in Western Europe. It appears in more than 80% of the population in Ireland, the Scottish Highlands, Western Wales, the Atlantic coast of France, and the Basque country. But inside this larger group, the Irish and Basques share certain levels and smaller branches that separate them from every other nation on the continent. DNA tests of the male Y chromosome show that Irishmen have the highest rate of the R1b haplogroup in Europe. Other parts of Europe received many waves of new settlers from the east, but Ireland's distant location meant that these waves arrived in smaller numbers or did not arrive at all. The Basques tell the same story from another direction. In a detailed multidimensional study, Ireland's closest genetic group was found to be Gipuzkoa, the easternmost of the Basque regions. The study showed that Gipuzkoa was genetically closer to Ireland than to any of the other Basque regions. That is a surprising result. It was not France, Wales, or even the rest of Spain. A specific Basque province in northern Spain was genetically closer to Ireland than to its own nearby regions. The R1b haplogroup itself is very old. One smaller group, known as the Atlantic modal haplotype, includes 6 genetic markers. These markers are common among people from the Atlantic coast of Europe. They are found in Wales, Ireland, the Orkney Islands, the Dutch province of Friesland, and the Basque country. In the British Isles, this group has been linked with people of Celtic ancestry. The Atlantic edge of Europe carries a shared genetic memory. At the farthest ends of that Atlantic edge, Ireland and the Basque country kept this memory most clearly. Even within Ireland, the genetic signal is not the same everywhere. It reaches its highest level not in the capital or on the east coast, where centuries of outside settlement left their mark, but in the west, in Connacht. Researchers found that people in Connacht had levels above 98%. This was the highest level of genes that had been common across Europe since Neolithic times. It was also the highest concentration of ancient pre-farming DNA found anywhere. The reason is the combined effect of geography and isolation. Ireland was always at the edge of Europe's migration routes. Most changes that began on the continent became weaker as they moved west. By the time a new population wave reached Ireland's western coast, it had already lost most of its strength. Professor Bradley explained this clearly. Great waves of human populations moved back and forth across Europe, but they did not reach Ireland's shores very strongly because Ireland was out on the edge. Connacht took this edge effect to the extreme. Surrounded by the Atlantic on 3 sides, it received less outside influence than any other part of the island. The ancient genetic mark that arrived from Spain after the Ice Age survived there in its strongest form. The 2017 Irish DNA Atlas study, published in Scientific Reports, added more detail to this picture. Researchers showed that the Irish population could be divided into 10 different geographic genetic groups. 7 of these groups had Gaelic Irish ancestry. 3 had shared Irish and British ancestry. The 7 Gaelic groups trace their roots to the same ancient population that crossed the Atlantic edge of Europe after the glaciers moved back. They are the genetic descendants of Ice Age survivors who reached Ireland and never completely left. Their DNA carries a living record of a journey made 10,000 years ago. The Basques were already a genetic mystery long before scientists began comparing their DNA with Irish DNA. The Basque language is not related to any other language in the world. It is a language isolate, a language with no known living or dead relatives anywhere on Earth. For a long time, scientists believed this language isolation showed that the Basque people had also been genetically isolated. For decades, scientists described the Basques as a kind of living museum of ancient European people. Some studies using genetic markers suggested that the Basques were isolated pre-Neolithic European groups that stayed in the region after Europe was repopulated from the Ice Age refuges. More recent studies of ancient DNA have made this picture more detailed. The Basques were not completely unchanged. Neolithic farmers and later steppe migrations left traces in their DNA. Ancient DNA evidence suggests that the Basques can be explained as a common Iberian Iron Age population with genetic influence from post-Neolithic steppe herders. However, they lacked the mixture from later incoming populations, such as Romans or North Africans. In other words, they accepted some early waves of people and then mostly closed the door. The Romans did not genetically replace them. Medieval migrations did not erase them. The Basque population living in the Franco-Cantabrian region, where Paleolithic people had taken shelter during the Last Glacial Maximum, kept genetic qualities from before the Neolithic period that other European populations gradually lost. This resistance to outside genetic influence is exactly what the Basques share with the people of Connacht. Both populations, pushed to the Atlantic edges of Europe, kept more of the original post-Ice Age genetic signal than almost anywhere else on the continent. That is the heart of the connection. It was not one recent migration. It was a shared ancient ancestry preserved by geography at both ends of Europe. The strongest proof of Ireland's deep ancestry came not from living people, but from bones taken from the ground. In an important study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2015, researchers from Trinity College Dublin studied the first complete genomes from prehistoric Irish people. The team sequenced the complete genomes of 4 prehistoric Irish individuals. One was a Neolithic woman who lived between 3043 and 3200 BC. She was found in a tomb at Ballynahattie near Belfast. The other 3 were early Bronze Age men who lived between 2026 and 1534 BC. They were found in a burial on Rathlin Island. These ancient genomes changed earlier ideas about the origins of the Irish people. The Neolithic woman had a genome that was mostly from the Near East. This suggests that many early farmers came to the island. The 3 Bronze Age individuals had a large amount of steppe ancestry. This shows that the population changes of the 3rd millennium BC reached all the way from southern Siberia to the Western Ocean. But here is what made the Irish case special. Even after these new groups arrived, something older remained underneath. The genetic similarity of the Irish Bronze Age people was strongest among modern Irish, Scottish, and Welsh populations. Several important genetic variants that are now found at their highest or very high levels in Ireland also appeared during this period. These included variants connected to lactose persistence, blue eyes, the Y chromosome R1b haplogroup, and the hemochromatosis allele. Ireland sits at the edge of many European genetic patterns. It has the highest levels in the world for some variants connected to lactose tolerance and the Western European Y chromosome type. The ancient skeletons confirmed what studies of living people had already suggested. Ireland's genome was formed early, shaped over a very long period, and preserved for longer than almost anywhere else. If Irish DNA is part of your ancestry, and for many people watching it is, go to the DNA website through the link in the description. A 3-volume PDF guide bundle shows you how to read your raw data and get the most from your ancestry, 23andMe, or similar results. The link is in the description. But do not go yet. The last part of this video is the most important. The ancient DNA research showed that modern Ireland was not formed by one founding population. It was shaped by 3 different waves of migration. Each wave arrived thousands of years apart. Each wave left a lasting mark on the Irish genome. The first wave came from the Near East, about 9,000 years ago, after the ice moved back and Ireland became livable. Early farmers traveled west from Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. They crossed Europe and eventually reached the shores of Ireland. The Neolithic woman from Ballynahatty had a genome that was mostly from the Near East. This suggests that many early farmers came to the island. These were the people who built the great stone tombs, including Newgrange and Carrowmore. They also built the dolmens scattered across the western hills. The second wave arrived about 4,000 years ago. It brought something that would change European civilization. The 3 Bronze Age people from Rathlin Island had a large amount of steppe ancestry. This shows that the population changes of the 3rd millennium BC reached from southern Siberia all the way to the Western Ocean. This change may also have brought an Indo-European language, possibly an early form of Celtic. These steppe herders were related to populations from the Pontic grasslands of modern Ukraine and southern Russia. They moved quickly across Europe and eventually reached Ireland. They brought metalworking, new burial traditions, and possibly the beginnings of the Irish language. The third layer is older than both of these. It is the hunter-gatherer population that arrived during and after the Ice Age. It was the Atlantic Edge population that had moved north from Iberia. All 3 layers came together over thousands of years. They mixed and created the genetic profile carried by modern Irish people. Each wave left something behind. Ireland's genetic story did not end with the Bronze Age. The island had been protected by its geography from many of Europe's ancient population changes. But it would not remain untouched forever. The Norse Vikings arrived in the late 8th century. At first, they came to raid. Later, they settled. Their effect was not only cultural and political, it was also genetic. The Irish DNA Atlas study found evidence of mixing events that showed Norse Viking gene flow into Ireland. The clearest traces appear in the eastern coastal regions, near the places where the Vikings built their long-term forts. These fortified harbors eventually became Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, and Cork. The genetic signal from Viking settlement can be measured, but it is not dominant. Ireland absorbed the Norse newcomers into its existing population instead of being replaced by them. The Normans followed in 1169. They brought another wave of outside influence, carried by mounted knights and feudal ambition. Like the Vikings, they left genetic traces. These traces are especially visible in the northeast, where the Ulster plantations of the 17th century created a very different genetic landscape. The Irish DNA Atlas found a genetic boundary across Northern Ireland. Ulster stood apart from the rest. The sharp difference reflected the strong effect of Scottish and English settlement during the plantation period. But through all of it, Vikings, Normans, plantations, and centuries of English colonial settlement, the deep western core remained. Connacht, the province facing the Atlantic and turning away from the rest of Europe, kept its ancient genetic mark better than any other region. The layers of conquest gathered along the eastern and northern edges. The oldest Ireland survived on the coast facing America and, genetically speaking, looking towards Spain. The genetic connection between Ireland and the Basques reaches deeper than DNA alone. It may also contain an echo of something even older: language. Basque is a language isolate. It is not related to any other language in the world. It has no known relatives in the Indo-European language family, which covers almost all of Europe, from Irish in the west to Bengali in the east. Basque existed before the spread of Indo-European languages. Scientists believe Basque may be a surviving part of the languages spoken across much of Western Europe before the steppe migrations arrived about 4,000 years ago and brought Indo-European languages with them. If this is correct, the people who moved from the Iberian refuge after the Ice Age and later reached Ireland may have spoken languages related to ancient Basque. Those languages were later replaced in Ireland by the incoming Celtic language brought by the steppe migrants. But the people who spoke the older languages left their genes behind. The Basque country was more isolated than Ireland. The Pyrenees protected it from the full force of Bronze Age migration. Because of this, the Basques kept both their genes and their language. Ireland kept the genes but lost the older language. Professor James Mallory, an archaeologist and linguist at Queen's University Belfast, explained why it is difficult to connect DNA studies with the spread of languages. When a settled population with a unique language is taken over by invaders, the local people may change their language while keeping much of their original gene pool. The genes of the newcomers may become mixed into the population without replacing it. This may explain why researchers have had trouble finding clear genetic evidence of the Celts in Ireland. The people came before the language. The language changed. The bloodline did not. The discovery that the Irish and Basques share an ancient ancestry is not just an academic curiosity. It changes the whole story of who the Irish are and where they came from. Many Irish people have grown up with a story of Celtic identity. They have heard about warriors arriving from Central Europe and about a culture formed through iron and legend. But the genetic evidence tells a different and much older story. The foundation of Irish identity was not created by the Celts. It was created by survivors. It was created by Ice Age refugees who held on at the Atlantic edge of Europe. When the glaciers moved back, these people traveled north along the coast until they reached an island at the end of the world. These people were genetically related to the people who became the Basques. They carried a genetic mark that Ireland kept more clearly than anywhere else on Earth. Modern Irish people share many genetic similarities with Scottish and Welsh populations, and to a lesser degree with the English. But the deep foundation, the ancient Atlantic layer, connects them most strongly to the Iberian Peninsula. The Irish DNA Atlas showed genetic similarities across the island that reflected Ireland's ancient provinces and major historical events. These events included the Norse Viking invasions and the Ulster plantations. Every invasion, every group of settlers, and every century of outside pressure left a mark. Yet something underneath survived all of it. That something arrived from Spain more than 10,000 years ago. It walked from boats onto the beaches of Connacht when Ireland was still a wild land of bogs and mountains. It has been there ever since. It passed quietly from parent to child through hundreds of generations. It survived every empire that tried to replace it. The DNA remembers what history forgot. When scientists compared Irish DNA with DNA from every European nation, they were not searching for a dramatic answer. They were simply running the analysis and following the data wherever it led. The data led them to a connection so ancient and unexpected that it changed how geneticists, historians, and anthropologists think about the Irish people. The match with the Basque country is not a small footnote. It is a foundation that reaches back beyond the Celts, beyond the Bronze Age steppe migrations, and beyond the first Neolithic farmers who built the great stone tombs. It reaches all the way back to the Ice Age. It reaches to a narrow, rocky coast in northern Spain, where a small population waited out the cold. Some of their descendants later traveled north across the Bay of Biscay and along the Atlantic edge to an island at the end of the world. That is where the Irish came from. Before they were Irish, and before they had any name at all, their DNA carried this story in silence for 10,000 years. Science finally learned how to read it. What the data says is simple, and it is astonishing. At their deepest genetic level, the Irish are children of Iberia. Thank you for watching.